This video touches on serious topics related to depression. Viewer discretion is advised. Spoilers for the following shows are in this video, but timestamps to skip to for each spoiler will be on screen. Animation is a very unique form of media, what can be described as moving art, either animated by hand or with assistance of computer generation. It's a very broad description. Stop motion is animation, Western cartoons are animation, anime is animation, CGI is animation, the list goes on. But there's a genre of animation that isn't defined by its art style that I want to talk about today. Adult animation. Animation targeted at an older demographic than most cartoons are targeted towards. I think all animation genres have the potential to touch on serious issues, but adult animation tends to do it to a far greater degree. Depression can be touched on in a kid's animation. A perfect example is Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh, a donkey who finds very little joy in things and lacks motivation, which is a textbook example of depression. But this tackling of depression is relatively one note and dumbed down for a younger audience. But for adult animation, portrayals of serious issues, specifically depression, are all too prevalent. The ability to tackle issues that cartoons targeted at a younger demographic cannot is not one that adult animation takes for granted.
How do you go on when nothing makes you happy?
Some would argue it gets beaten like a dead horse, some foreshadowing intended. Today we're going to be talking about this phenomenon and how adult animation is obsessed with depression. Being depressed means being sad. The end. For real though, depression is a diagnosable mood disorder which can affect someone's day-to-day life by causing their mood to be lowered, resulting in negative self-image, lack of motivation, lack of focus, thinking everything is awful, and in severe cases, thoughts of harm to oneself. For all of the portrayals we're going to be touching on, they need to show at least a majority of symptoms that we've discussed to be included as depression, rather than another mental disorder. With the definition out of the way, let's move on to examples of how adult animation portrays depression. Love it or hate it, modern adult animation would not be what it is without Rick and Morty. The humor and animation style's influence over other shows is undeniable, and the influence of how this show touched on depression is present in many other shows that came after it. The concept of a self-loathing, selfish, depressed person is by no means exclusive to Rick and Morty. It happens in real life, too. I'm sure some are even watching this video right now. Rick Sanchez C-137 from Rick and Morty was a man driven to his limits after Rick Prime killed his wife. He went from an optimistic explorer to a cynical narcissist chasing after the man who took his family from him. Rick's outlook on the world is to simply ignore the things he doesn't like, and to numb himself to this pain of his loss through substances and distractions. He frequently does things just to prove he can, and flaunts his intelligence to make himself feel better. As big of an ego as he has, he's been driven to attempting something which I'm not going to elaborate on so that I can monetize this video. I would argue this isn't out of self-loathing, but rather loathing of the world around him and how it affects him, which is a very distinct difference. Turning our attention, we'll talk about a show that started a bit after Rick and Morty. Smiling Friends is a great show. I really love it. And the first episode of it has a perfect example we can use of a depiction of depression. I will not say unalive in this video because it's stupid for stupid people online, and if you use it, you're stupid, but there was this guy named Desmond, and he was going to try doing that to himself. He wasn't finding any joy in his life. Saying he was down in the dumps would be an understatement. Well, only so much can be explored in an 11-minute episode. Desmond's Big Day Out shows a progression where Desmond cheers up when he discovers what makes him happy in life. Murder. Regardless of what other characters we talk about, Desmond's character is a relatively one-dimensional approach to depression, but that doesn't mean it's not without merit. Sometimes people really can turn their outlook on life around that quickly, but on the whole, it's a much longer process that some of these characters never figure out. Let's talk about a big one, a show that was inevitable I talk about, as it's just a collection of mentally ill people talking to each other. So it's a lot like TikTok. Bojack Horseman is my favorite show ever, and I would love to talk about it at length, but This video can only be so long, and I don't want it all to be Bojack, so I'll summarize a couple characters who portray two different approaches to depression. The titular Bojack Horseman is a self-centered, narcissistic, depressed, selfish addict, but we're still supposed to feel for him. The point I've taken away from Bojack's character is that he has enough negative traits that most people have that you'll find yourself rooting for him, only to be reminded all too often how horrible of a person he actually is. But an overarching trend of his character is that he hates himself. We see this portrayed in a very realistic way when we see the internal monologue of his in the episode's Stupid Piece of Shit.
You're a real stupid piece of shit. But I know I'm a piece of shit. That at least makes me better than all the pieces of shit who don't know they're pieces of shit. Or is it worse? Breakfast. Oh, I don't deserve breakfast. Shut up. Don't feel sorry for yourself. What does that do? Get breakfast, you stupid fat ass. These are cookies. This is not breakfast. You are eating cookies. Stop it. Stop eating cookies and go make yourself breakfast. Stop it. Don't eat one more cookie. Put that cookie down. Do not eat that cookie. I can't believe you ate that cookie.
Bojack knows what he does is wrong, but he can't stop. Or rather, he doesn't. He gets taken over by bouts of impulsive behavior where he struggles to hold himself back from going to the bar or throwing a stuffed animal his mom with dementia thought was her baby off a balcony in front of her. Bojack's depression and disillusion with the world leads to him not trying to do better. He continues to be shitty because he doesn't see a point in doing better, until he does. Eventually, Bojack takes accountability and tries going to rehab and doing better. He starts trying to give himself purpose, which helps drag him out of his doomer mindset, as he realizes that to do better mentally, he has to not grovel in his sadness. Bojack always had confidence, sometimes to his detriment, but just because someone thinks they're right constantly doesn't make them happy. Bojack blames his depression for how the world around him is, not how he interacts with it. He doesn't see himself as the problem. Conversely, let's take a look at Diane Nguyen, who sees the world in the opposite, while still being depressed in her own way. For example, in the episode Good Damage, Diane is trying to write a book on her childhood trauma, but every time she sits down to write it, she has writer's block, aka the main reason this video took so long to make, and can't seem to pinpoint what traumatized her so much, and starts doubting the validity of her own trauma. In the overwhelm of work and self-management, Diane stops taking her meds out of self-hatred that comes from her stress. I find this portrayal very realistic as a self-managing mentally ill. I could talk forever about instances in Bojack Horseman of depression, but we really would be here all day analyzing most of the characters. Let's move on. South Park is depraved and gratuitous, and it's famous for just that, which is what makes the moments touching on serious issues that much more impactful. Stan Marsh is one of the main characters of South Park, and in the two-part episodes You're Getting Old and Asperger's, we see Stan turn 10 and become disillusioned with the world following his parents separating, and he starts seeing everything as shit. Like actual shit. He just thinks everything is shit. Turns himself into a pickle. Funniest shit I've ever seen. Stan is then reached out to by Morpheus from the Matrix, who tells him that the world really is shit and everyone else lives in an illusionary world, but orders him to take a serum so he can interact with the fake world everyone else sees. Serum is whiskey. Remember, kids, alcoholism is the way. Even by the end of the episode where Stan's parents get back together, the final shot is of Stan reaching into his drawer and taking a swig from a bottle. This episode isn't reiterated on, but we see Stan drink in the future. South Park just turned a 10-year-old into an alcoholic, and it wasn't even for a gag. What's notable is that even when Stan's life is back to normal and he's conquered his depression, he still stands by his vice from a more difficult time. I made a video on Family Guy a year and a half ago. Jesus, a year and a half ago. I made a video on Family Guy a year and a half ago when it was everywhere on TikTok. And despite how one may assume they're free from Peter Louvenbroy Griffin, he lurks around every corner. But we aren't talking about Peter today. Let's turn our attention to a different character from the show, Brian Griffin. I'll let this clip speak for itself.
How come you have a gun?
I don't know.
What do you mean you don't know? What about all that liberal crap you're always spewing about stricter gun regulations? Come on, please.
I keep it in case I ever want to commit, okay?
Wow. Oh. Oh my God, you're serious? But why, Brian?
You wouldn't understand. You're just a kid.
Well, I could try.
I don't know. Sometimes it's all too much.
What is?
Life, everything. Just having the gun here, knowing there's a way out, it helps.
That's some serious shit coming from Brian fucking Griffin. Later in this scene, Brian and Stewie get into talking about this topic in more detail. And it's this weirdly genuine moment where Brian opens up about his future plan. As we can see from modern Family Guy, this plan was not carried out. Nonetheless, this is a surprisingly mature approach to a serious topic from Family Guy, of all shows. This next one is the opposite. It's honestly more of an honorable mention than anything. Relegated to a throwaway joke, we see depression tackled in a very unserious way. I love Clone High. Well, the first season. I mean, the only season, because it ended and was not continued in a charmless, shitty reboot. Back to the point. Honestly, this portrayal just feels mean and hard to watch. As Gandhi puts Van Gogh on speakerphone to mock him at a party as he opens up about his depression. Not to say this approach is despicable or whatever. A one-off joke in a show from 2002 isn't anything to bat an eye at, but it's definitely a different take on the issue. I want to touch on one final character who portrays depression in a unique way. Debbie Grayson had gone through a lot following season 1 of the show. She lost her husband, but less in the widow way and more in the he killed thousands and flew off into space way. Not only is Debbie coping with one of the most dramatic portrayals possible, but her son is going off to college and she's now at home alone, in the home she owned with her serial killer husband. Yeesh. Cecil and Art both reach out to Debbie, consoling her in her time of need, where her outlook on life and herself are at an all-time low. But both are mostly unsuccessful. However, what did help Debbie was when she went to a support group for widows of superheroes. Debbie felt less alone, and this empowers her a bit. But this is only temporary, as the spouse of the Green Ghost, one of Omni-Man's victims, ostracizes Debbie from the support group for not knowing who her husband was. She's devastated and stays in this depression until Mark brings home Omni-Man's son with another woman who is a bug alien. Debbie begins caring for Omni-Man's baby, named Oliver, and this gives her new joy in life. Unlike the other characters in this video that we've looked at, Debbie Grayson from Invincible is trying to get better and live her life in spite of her trauma, instead of sulking in it. This isn't to say depressed people choose to sulk. Depression takes on many forms, and tackling it is a different process for everyone. This is why I feel talking about all of these characters is important. Everyone experiences depression differently, and this is evident even when we look at two characters in the same show. Bojack and Diane experience depression entirely differently, and both of their depressive symptoms are different from Brian Griffin's. Some of these characters are medicated, some aren't. Some of these characters use drugs or drink, some don't. The point is, no matter who you are, anyone can suffer from depression. And through these both tasteful and tasteless descriptions, we've seen that adult animation is obsessed with depression. But hey, we've already been over it. Thanks for watching.